You've lived a great life and done well for yourself. But what mark will you leave on the world? How will you inspire future generations? Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand have helped thousands of people answer exactly those questions. If you've ever wondered, what will be my legacy? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Stan and Katie Beth.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today is the founder of the Legacy Letter Challenge, Blake Brewer. Blake, welcome to the show.
Stan, Katie Beth, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we jump in and talk about the specifics of the Legacy Letter Challenge, I was hoping that you might take a few minutes and talk to our listeners about your backstory and what actually inspired you to be so passionate about legacy letters.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just start with the premise that I believe the most powerful voice spoken on the planet is spoken by a father and by a mother. So all of us that are parents, we want to help our children be successful in life. We don't want to get to the end on the last day on the planet, which we're all going to have a last day. We don't want to get there and have regrets and there be things that, man, I wish I could have done this, or I wish I would have said this. And so my dad really did something incredible for me with his words, really gave me an amazing gift. And so to understand this mission that I'm on, you got to really understand this gift. And when I was 19, I was a freshman at the University of Arkansas. My mom called me and said, Blake, we're going on a family vacation to Hawaii. I said, heck yeah, let's go. And so the first day that we were there, we were at the beach and we decided to go snorkeling. And it was my dad and I out in the water. So my mom and sister, they were on the beach, and there was nowhere else I wanted to be than right there with my dad. My dad was a really good dad. Now, my dad wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but my dad was my hero. And so my dad, he was actually known, his claim to fame is that he was a really good football player. So he played at Louisiana Tech. He had been drafted by the Falcons, but he was Terry Bradshaw's tight end. And so they were best friends and roommates. My dad caught Bradshaw's first ever collegiate touchdown pass. But my dad was also a very humble guy. So he hardly ever told anyone that he was Terry Bradshaw's tight end. But on the other hand, I told everybody. It was like my claim to fame growing up. And so we're out there in the water and we just kept going further and further out. And the water got deeper, the current picked up, the waves got bigger. And I realized that I didn't know where my dad was. And so I started scanning the water looking for him. Where's my dad? Where's my dad? And then I saw him. And when I saw my dad, we made eye contact and I could tell that my dad was not doing well and that he was struggling and he was treading water, but he started yelling for help. My dad had this really big, deep, booming voice, but my dad's yell for help was more like a whimper. And so I swam to my dad as quickly as I could. By the time I reached, my dad was underneath the water and he was unconscious. And so I dove down, wrapped my arms around my dad, pulled him back up to the surface, and did my best to get my dad to shore as quickly as I could. Luckily, a nearby snorkeler saw what was going on and helped me get my dad to shore. And the lifeguard showed up and they started doing CPR to my dad. And I really thought that at any moment my dad was going to come to, that the water was going to come out of his mouth, his eyes were going to flicker open. I'm on my hands and knees just crying out to God, would you please save my dad's life? But my dad ended up drowning. And so it went from one of the best days of my life, best moments of my life, to the worst. And I'm sitting there on the beach next to my dad. What the heck just happened? Like, he was just with me. And so I was already asking those questions of, man, how in the world are we about to make it without my dad? Like, how am I going to make it? So then it was a few hours later that we're back in the condo. And I'm sitting on the edge of the bed in the back bedroom, still just in total shock. And my mom walks in the room and she's holding some sheets of paper and says, I just found something in your dad's briefcase, something I know he was going to give you on this trip. I had no idea what it was, but she walked across the room and handed me a letter. And it was a letter that my dad apparently had been working on for several months. He had no idea that he was going to die when he wrote this letter, had no idea that this would be his final words. But as I was reading this letter, it was everything that I needed in that moment. I just found so much peace and comfort and hope, like hope that I'm going to make it through this. And then I just felt so loved. Don't tell me my dad didn't love me. My dad was a hospital CEO. He reffed football games as his hobby. He was very involved in our church. Like, my dad was a really busy guy, just like we all are as dads. Yet in the midst of that, he took time to put down on paper how he feels about me, feels about my sister and brother, share some wisdom with us. As I get to the last line of this letter, my dad wrote, and so my dad was a person of faith. And so he wrote, as you're being faithful to the Bible, you're often going to find yourself in the minority. But I assure you that in heaven, you'll be in the majority. Love your dear old dad. And so reading those words right there is, man, that's exactly what I needed. And just helped me look forward to heaven. One day I'm going to see my dad again. And so that letter helped me get through that next year as I was grieving really hard. And for the last 20 years has continued to impact me and influence me. I go back to the letter. I read the letter now that I'm a dad, and there's things my dad wrote 19 years ago that I read a certain way then, and now I read it differently now. And I cannot even imagine my life without this letter. Like, it just redirected my life, and I'm just so grateful that he did that.
That's
That's
incredible.
quite a
And
story.
yes, it's so incredible. And as you mentioned, you are a dad now as well. And so talk to us about how becoming a father has really changed your perspective on the letter. And then also, you can tell us a little bit about, I assume your kids have legacy letters from you. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So when my kids were young, so I've got a 7, 5, and 2-year-olds when they were even younger. So I've got a girl, Gracie Kate. She's got the double name, and it's less common over here in Oklahoma. So people are already giving her a hard time about it. I'm like, if we were over in Arkansas, nobody would say anything.
She would fit right in here in
Right.
Arkansas.
And but when my kids were younger, I'm just like everyone else. I want to be a good dad. And I'm over here, okay, what do I do? What can I do to be a good dad? And then it just dawned on me, I got to write my kids a letter. If anyone knows the value of a letter from their dad, it's me. And so I go to write this letter to my kids, and I'm staring at this blank sheet of paper. And I realized in that moment why there's so many people that have not gotten a letter from their dad, because it's not easy to do. And so I was looking at, like, what the heck am I going to write here? And it hung over my head, honestly, until I finished. But in the middle of that, I started doing some research and thinking through, okay, if I'm going to write this letter, I want to write the best letter possible. I want to include all the things that my children need to hear from me as their dad. And my conviction grew for this letter. Man, they need my voice. They need this letter. They need me to be very clear about how I feel about them and what our family values are, especially in the chaotic world that we live in right now. And so when I finished this letter, it felt good. It was at this milestone moment in my fatherhood journey. And I knew it created something of value for them. But then I realized, like, this letter, I thought it was for them, but this letter was for me. I'm the one who became a better dad and a better person through writing this letter. I will share with y'all that I decided to go ahead and read it to my daughter when she was 4. And I shared this on the Today Show a couple months ago. But each night I'm normally reading her a book, like a princess book or something. And that night I said, hey, Daddy's got something for you. And so I began to read this letter, and I forgot to take into account how emotional I was going to be reading this thing. I'm just boohooing all over this letter. She had never seen me cry before. And I finally get to the end of it, and I look up at her, and she looks at me and she says, Daddy, can you read me the princess book now?
That's a kid
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
Classic kid.
I read her the princess book, but then the next night she did go up to my wife and she said, last night, Daddy read me a message. Can he read me that message again tonight?
Oh.
And so she didn't understand every concept in that letter. She will in time, but she got the main one. She's got a daddy that loves her.
Right.
And so it was really through that process and the transformation I saw in myself, but also thinking through my dad's letter and the impact that it's had on my life, that I realized, man, I've got to help more people get this letter from their dad. And so that's where our mission started, to help 1 million dads write at least one written, meaningful, lasting legacy letter. We've since included moms in the mission. But this is what I do full time for the last 2.5 years, as I guide parents on this journey of writing this letter, making sure that all the good stuff is in there. We have a template that, and we'll share with however one can get that for free, and guide them on this. So at the end of it, they have this letter that I tell people, you already have a legacy letter in your heart. We just got to get that letter from your heart to your mind to a piece of paper. so then it can get into your children's heart. And so that's what we're going to do.
I love that. Tell us a little bit more. You do speaking engagements where you can teach people in large groups or small groups about legacy letters. And then, so talk about that. And then also tell our listeners about the master classes that you do and what they could expect from those.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that we help people write their letter. And I did not know this when we started. When I started, I was just individuals signing up and I was helping a lot of people virtually. But then some financial advisors and some estate attorneys were like, man, they went through it and they're like, we need this for our clients. And we started partnering with advisors to help them do that. And people can go through the master class, which is recorded videos of each section of the letter, the intro section, the apology section, I love you and I'm proud of you, I believe in you, special memories, the advice section, how to give the letter to your children. And then some people want me to come in and speak. And so we can do all of that in the matter of an hour or two, guiding them through the letter. I partner a lot with businesses as well who provide our program for their employees. And so I just finished up a contract with Walmart, and I helped 7 of their teams a letter to their children over 3 weeks. And so these teammates bonded writing this letter to their children. And so I talked to the vice president, an amazing guy, but he was like, man, they're working better together than they've ever worked because they care about each other now, which, by the way, the reason that Justin knew about it, the vice president, is because his financial advisor purchased this program for him. And so there's just so much ripple effect that's been happening.
That's incredible. And as I was researching your masterclass, it comes full circle with the story you told because I see that Terry Bradshaw is also speaking as part of some of the masterclass you have coming up.
Yeah, Terry called me the other day. I didn't know that he was going to be calling me. Like, him and I aren't just like close friends where we talk every week. And I get this phone call from a number in Texas, and I pick up and it goes, man, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing pretty good. I said, who is this? And he started laughing. He said, you can't tell who this is. And then I said, is this Bradshaw? And he said, man, did my laugh give it away? And so then we ended up talking for 15 minutes. He had just seen the episode on the Today Show, and he was like, man, I knew you were doing something with like letters, but I didn't fully get it till I saw that. And so he's like, man, I'm going to do this for my daughters. And then, yeah, we're doing a deal in May. I'm going to interview him about his fatherhood journey.
That's very cool. I love that. So another question I had for you is you mentioned that you're a person of faith and that your father was. How does that impact the work that you do?
I think being a person of faith has impacted everything that I've done. And I'm really grateful. My dad really helped me in my relationship with God. And especially after he died, because I'm sitting there thinking, okay, how could a good God have allowed this to happen to my dad? I knew that the answer was not that God was not good, because my dad didn't believe that God was good. So the answer had to be something else. But really, after my dad died and some of the things that he wrote in the letter, I knew that I wanted to live with purpose, with God, for God, and to serve people. And so as I'm helping people write their letter, I help people of all faiths write their letter. Like, it doesn't matter what faith you are. Like, you want to be a good dad, you want to be a good mom. And so I've had atheists go through it and had a great experience. But I really just love helping parents connect with their children on a deeper level. And if a person is a person of faith, they obviously want to help their children grow in their faith as well. And so that's going to be a part of the letter.
That's awesome. Stan, I know you are full of questions. What questions do you have for Blake?
Yeah. So one of the things I really like about what you're doing, it really comes out of our own experience. We encourage our clients in our law firm to write letters to, for example, the trustee who's going to be administering a trust. So when the kids come in for money, we like for the trustee to read that letter so they have an idea of what mom and dad had in mind when they set this up. But one of the things we found is that a lot of people get on board with the idea of writing a letter, but a blank computer screen is just a really intimidating thing. And so what I love about what you're doing is that you're providing a roadmap. You're dropping the breadcrumbs so that people don't have to pull up the laptop and and just start typing in a blank Word document. I think that's really the magic, isn't it? Is giving people a path to follow.
Yeah, I knew when we started this mission that it was not going to be enough for me just to inspire people with my story, that I really need to help people write this letter. Because I saw it myself, like how difficult it was to write it, because you're busy, you got a lot of things going on, and it's almost overwhelming. Like, it's one thing to write a letter to your friend, but to write it to your children, like the people you love so much. And so we just created a process that really helps people think through what they want to say, but also knowing, hey, you're on the right path. They're like, these things that you're going to say, your children want these things. Like, we're not going to leave anything out. Like, all the good stuff is going to be there. Yeah, Stan.
So you've done this a while now, and I'm really curious. I'm sure as much as you've been out there doing this, I feel pretty sure that you've gotten some letters or phone calls from guys that have really done this and gotten feedback. I'd like to hear, some of those stories.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeff Teagues, he's a retired member of Delta Force. And so I got to help this group of Delta Force guys. I was on Zoom, and it was really cool to be able to help these guys do it. One, my dad was very patriotic. And so to be able to help these guys write their legacy letter. And so he finishes his letter. Man, he was so proud of his letters for his 21 and 23-year-old sons. And so he gives it to them on Christmas. And his sons open it up, and they're like, they were not necessarily expecting this for Christmas. So they're like, oh, like a letter, cool letter, Dad. And he said they went home and read it that night and came back the next day, and they gave him a little bro hug. And that was it. Said, thanks for the letter. And he's over here thinking, man, what in the world? I know this letter, I put my heart and soul into it. I was expecting a little more than that. But he said, I didn't want to press it. So 6 months go by, and Jeff's friend calls him. And his friend says, hey, I just got done hanging out with your son. Your son told me that you wrote him a letter this past Christmas. Your son said it's his most treasured possession, that he reads it every single week, sometimes multiple times a week. Jeff had no idea. His son lived in a different state, and every week his son was going to this letter. Some of those weeks where he was having a great week, some of those weeks he was having a hard week, and he was able to connect with his dad and get some encouraging words from his dad. And so really that's the power of this letter, because you can return to, when you put your words on paper, you can return to this letter over and over. Another reason I tell parents to write this letter right away and not to wait, because it cuts through the noise in this crazy noisy world that we're in. And so one of the dads that finished his letter, he was the CEO of a company over here in Tulsa. Great dad. Went into it like, okay, I love my kids. I don't know if I need to write this letter. Gets to the end of it and says, okay, I get it. He knew he had created something of value for his children. Gives it to his daughter, 21-year-old daughter, on Valentine's Day. So what a cool present to get from your dad on Valentine's Day. And so she reads it. She loves it. There was tears. It wasn't until Father's Day last year where she wrote him his Father's Day card, and she wrote to him, and he sent it to me. He said, she said, Dad, you'll never know how much that letter meant to me and how much I needed it. It was as if God himself was speaking to me. The relationship that you and I have is better off because of it, but every relationship that I have, there's more trust in it because of your letter. And what had happened was, she and her boyfriend had just broken up like a few weeks before that. And so she was living in a world of insecurity, and it was just really noisy, trying to figure out who she was. And then her dad comes in with this letter, just cut through all the noise. And so I get stories like that all the time. And so it is so rewarding. I could have never imagined in a million years this is what I would get to do.
And I love the way you're approaching this, using the master class, and you got some great press. So you're able to multiply this. So it's not just a few people now, it's thousands and thousands of people that are able to be inspired by what you're doing. I'm blown away by it. I'm having trouble getting to this interview. You can tell.
Hey, do you get emotional like this in every interview you do?
No.
A lot of our interviews are about the financial and legal industry, so it just doesn't bring a tear to the eye quite like this one does.
I'll tell you this real quick. There was a dad. I just talked to him on the phone last week, and he said that he gave his 3 sons, adult sons and daughter, a letter for this past Christmas, and he had gotten really into it. And he was really proud of his letter. And so he gave little keepsake boxes, like wooden boxes, to go along with it. And then also put some family heirlooms in these boxes as well. And so they opened it up Christmas morning. And his 3 sons, man, they love these words from their dad. And they told him that. But then it was his daughter. who called back that night. She's 31 years old. She's a mom. Called back that night, and he had already gone to bed. So he talked to his wife, and the daughter said, "Mom, this was the best Christmas I've ever had." And the mom said, "We love having you guys over. Like, we love hosting you guys." And she goes, "No, Mom, it was Dad's letter." She said, "I knew that Dad loved me, but there was just something in me that made me think that maybe Dad loved my brothers more than me. But when I read this letter, I saw how much Dad loves me, and it just brought closure into my life." And again, this dad had no idea that his daughter had. Sometimes we don't know what our children are thinking, or we've said one thing and they receive it differently. And so you can imagine how he felt after she read this letter. And man, I'm so glad that he wrote this letter. He told me, I brought it up at church the next week, and I was telling the Sunday school class, and he said there was 30 parents in there just all boohooing, thinking about how they need to write a letter to their kids.
Oh, I love that. Is your wife, has she helped you make the mom version of the program? Has she also written legacy letters to your children as well?
So my wife is very busy being a mom to our children. And there's some other great ladies in my life who have helped me do the mom's version as well. And then I'm actually helping my community group at church right now that my wife is in. And so I'm like leading them through writing their legacy letter. So for the first time, she's able to hear me teach, which I do weekly all the time. I help people write this letter, but she hasn't really heard me do it. But now she has. So that's been fun.
That is fun. That is fun. And so my next question for you on that before we wrap up, one interesting thing that I'm noticing is obviously with your letter, you received it after your father had passed, and that was very powerful and served clearly as a guide for your life of wisdom. But do you encourage your clients to go ahead and give these letters to their children when they're written? Is there a certain age that you recommend, or do you leave that up to the client? It seems like a lot of the clients that you've already written their letters and then given them to their children. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple things. People ask me what is the best age to write this letter to their children. I tell them that the best age to write this to your kids was the day your kids were born. So they have something written down from you. One, in case something were to happen. But the second best time is now. And so there was a 91-year-old lady on the call last week writing to her children. Are going to love this letter from her. I help a lot of parents with young kids, teenage kids going off to college. A lot of people are writing their letter right now to their seniors who are about to go off, and what a great time to get it. But I tell parents when they're writing the letter, hey, this is your letter. So you can give it when you want, if you want it waiting for you when you die. But I remind them, my dad was going to give me that letter that weekend. And so he knew that his 19-year-old son, me, needed those words, and I did. And we know that our children, if they're not currently in a situation right now, they're about to be one. They're about to face a decision. They're about to face potentially a big opportunity or a temptation that could totally derail them. In the words that are in this letter, we know that they're going to be better off with them than without them. So in my opinion, let's get these words into their life as soon as possible.
I love that. I love that.
Yep.
Is there anything else you would like for our listeners to know about the masterclass that you offer, or you as a speaker, or any encouragement you would give them about legacy letters?
Anyone that's listening, you can write a legacy letter. You have it in you. You have what it takes to write this letter. There's people that have been authors of books who have gone through my program, and they said, man, you helped me think through some things I never would have. My letter is better because of you. And then there's people that are not writers at all, and they go through it and they're like, man, thank you for helping me get some words on paper. The best way to be a part of our mission is, number one, write your legacy letter, which you can go get the free guide at legacyletterchallenge.com. If you want to jump into the masterclass and sign up for the masterclass. And then if you're a person who wants to really be a part of this mission by helping other people write their legacy letter, whether you're a business owner and clients, employees, or at a church, whatever, man, I would love to talk to you about that. And I love getting over to Arkansas. So my mom lives in Hot Springs Village, and so I'm over there quite a bit. My mom got remarried, and I have a great stepdad. My kids call him Grandpa, and so he's really embraced that role.
That's awesome. That is awesome and great wisdom. Thanks everybody for listening. This has been the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today has been Blake Brewer. For more information about Blake, the work that he does, or a free template for getting your letter started, go to legacyletterchallenge.com. Blake, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more about Stan and Katie Beth, go to pinnaclelegacylaw.com. You can also find links in the show notes.